And welcome back. In a previous video, I'd left off putting this actuator piece in place and kind of talking to an issue that I found myself encountering when I installed it. I didn't pay attention to the caution that was in the next step, and as I was trying to manipulate this piece and make sure it was lined up correctly and working, I noticed that it was a little bit tighter to rotate than I had expected. Essentially, it was binding. So after I'd gone through all these steps and torqued everything in place, I started, as you see here, starting to manipulate it, and I can tell that it's got a lot more resistance than I expected. So I started looking at it and looked back at the instructions, and that's when I noticed the caution that I had looked over. And basically what it talks to is the fact that each builder is building this to a different length, obviously, because it just tells you to construct this essentially to a specific range of lengths, and each builder will have a different tolerance. And so it addresses that by telling you to install a washer between the actuator and the bearing, because what I had found is that green bracket on the top there was being bent in towards the actuator piece, and it was causing the bearings to bind up and make it more difficult to turn than it should have. So corrected that. Now I'm putting it back together here, as you can see, and retorquing everything, and it moves a whole lot better, and it moves freely. So now moving on to installing the rest of the actuator system in place, putting the torque tube in here. This is where it attaches from that actuator to the bell crank to manipulate the aileron itself. Now again, these are all items that it tells you to make to a certain length, and so this is where you have to kind of fine-tune everything. You'll see me going back and forth and adjusting bearings and all of that. And then here you see the rod and bearing going in between the actuator bracket piece. Alright, I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but this is a tool I was talking to in an earlier video that I couldn't find when I was putting the aileron in place. It's a little washer wrench or tool. Basically, you can take any washer that you have and slide it into the jaws of the tool, and it'll hold it in place. And what you can use this for is to slide the washer in between two pieces of material to hold it in place and drop the bolt or whatever in place. So these I got off of Aircraft Spruce. They weren't very expensive, but I would highly recommend them. It comes in a pack. I think there's about 8 or 9 different size or pieces with 2 different sizes on each piece. So wide variety of ranges of sizes for washers, and very useful tool. So as you can see here, using that tool to place the washer in between the bearing and the bracket of the actuator. In previous steps on the empennage, when you're working on the, I believe it's a horizontal stabilizer, it basically tells you to use tape or some other things to kind of dangle washers in between bearings and brackets. And this is a much easier method. And so yeah, like I said, I would highly recommend going to Aircraft Spruce and picking that pack up and utilizing that. It makes things a lot simpler. So this video is going to mostly be trying to close out the majority of this right wing. There's going to be a lot of basically little adjustments here and there, lining up the rest of the actuator system for the aileron, and then also going back and just making sure everything is completed. One of the things I'd actually found was that I had forgotten to rivet the most inboard rib of the leading edge to the spar. So fortunately, I've left these bottom skins off just for things like that. There's no reason to put those bottom skins on, and so might as well keep them off so I have access in case there's other things that I decide to install or I realize that I may have forgotten to do. So I had to take the fuel tank back off, riveted that last bracket into place for the leading edge, and then put the fuel tank back on. And then the rest of this video is going to be just verifying everything else is complete, along with finishing out this actuator system here. One of the things I decided to do was to install a flex tube down the length of the wing. And I split it right where the bell crank is, and you'll see that here toward the end of the video. But that gives me access to the wiring run through that flex tube, and I'll show that here in just a little bit. All right, I wanted to show this particular step. This piece here is the basically the template to align the aileron in the neutral position. So the instructions basically tell you to take this piece out, fit it over this washer, and then place an AM3 bolt here in a machine hole that's on this rib. So that lines everything up between these 2 points, and then you just tape the aileron over to, lightly basically tape it in place to hold it in the neutral position while you're setting up all the rigging. I wanted to show a little closer up of what I've been working on in this step. So I'm working on all of the aileron bell crank assembly, all the torque tubes and everything that goes with manipulating the ailerons. So this is the bell crank. You can see the torque tube that goes to the root of the wing, and then you have the torque tube that goes to the aileron itself. And then it's got a little template piece that's still got the bluing on it. That's what lines everything up into the neutral position as far as the rigging goes. So once you get that set in the neutral position, and then you use that piece on the end of the aileron to hold everything, by the time you go to attach, I don't know how well you can see it, but by the time you go to attach this rod end bearing to this hole, that should line everything up to be neutral for the whole rigging. So we'll see how it works out, but so far everything seems to be lining up pretty well. So as I'm making this video, I'm actually working on the left wing now. I've finished most of the work that I want to do on the right wing and kind of set the rest aside, and kind of moved on to try to get the left wing caught up. Fortunately for the left wing, I've got most of the big components done, so I don't think it'll take me more than maybe two months worth of work, because I've got the fuel tank done already. The leading edge is mostly done, just essentially got to rivet it. Everything is fitted and prepped, and the spar is already prepped as far as putting all the nut plates and all that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of attaching the ribs, which is what I'm in the process of doing, and then attaching all of the other components and making the ailerons and the flaps. So we'll see, how long it takes, but it's almost to the point where I'm ready to order the fuselage kit, which will take about 10 weeks once I place it on order. And as you can see, we had a successful test of the aileron. Actuator system all works just fine. There's a couple spots where it seemed to bind a little bit, but I believe that that's going to be beyond the extent of what the range of the aileron is going to be as far as how many degrees it goes up and down. So we'll verify all that, but it all looks good. So here you see me putting in the flex tubing I was mentioning earlier, and essentially I'm just zip tying this through the grommets that I believe the VOR antenna cabling or wiring will go through. So plenty of room to go, to use that. But this will allow me, as you can see here, to run wire runs from the wingtip all the way to the roots. So that way if I decide to install something at a later date, it's a lot easier to fish those wires through the wing. And as you can see, it's broken up right there in the middle of the wing, and that's just so that there's an access panel there where the bell crank is. And so I'll be able to get in there and feed the wires in there. And then also, if I decide to install something mid-wing, there's a break point, and makes it a little easier. And what you see me doing here is basically closing out the rest of the fuel tank. These are the attach bracket bolts. These are where the Z brackets on the fuel tank attach to the spar to hold that fuel tank in place. So as I mentioned before, leaving the bottom skins off so I can kind of close everything out, make sure everything is installed and And then if I decide later on that I want to put something else in the wings, I have access, so there's no need. No need to close these out. Alright, so this is where I'm going to let this video run out. For those who continue to watch these videos, I appreciate it. If you get a chance, hit that subscribe button and that like button. It'll improve my ratings and let you know next time I have one of these videos made. We'll see you next time around.